He lived in a quiet neighborhood, a place where everyone seemed to know everyone. The streets were lined with small houses, each with neat lawns and children playing on weekends. It looked peaceful, the kind of place where nothing exciting ever happened, and that suited him perfectly. He liked the calm, the routine, the simplicity of life away from chaos. He had moved here several years ago, seeking peace after years of a very different life, a life full of challenges and dangers that he rarely spoke about. Most people just saw him as the quiet man next door, the one who mowed his lawn on Saturdays and waved at everyone passing by. No one knew the truth about him, and he intended to keep it that way. Every morning he followed the same routine. He woke up before dawn, made a strong cup of coffee, and went for a run. The streets were empty at that hour, and he liked it that way. Running cleared his mind and reminded him that discipline was important in every part of life. After his run, he returned home, showered, and prepared breakfast. He always ate alone, though sometimes he waved at the neighbors across the street or nodded politely to someone walking their dog. Conversations were rare. He preferred it that way. Talking too much about himself would have raised questions he wasn't ready to answer. He worked from home most of the time. His job was ordinary on the surface, something that didn't draw attention. But behind closed doors, he stayed sharp, maintaining skills that few could imagine. Years of training, missions in faraway places, moments most people only see in movies. These things were never spoken about. Only he knew the weight he carried, the knowledge of what he could do if circumstances demanded it. For now he stayed hidden, blending in, letting the world see only what he wanted them to see. The neighborhood, despite its calm appearance, had its tensions. There were murmurs of resentment and prejudice, subtle looks exchanged when he walked down the street. At first he ignored it. He had faced far worse in the past, and he knew that small-mindedness often spoke louder than actions. But he kept an eye on the patterns, the faces, the energy around him. He didn't react, but he observed. Awareness was always part of survival. On a sunny afternoon, he took a walk down the street. Children played on the sidewalk, their laughter ringing in the air. Neighbors watered their plants, chatted in small groups, and waved occasionally. Everything seemed ordinary, but his instincts picked up small things. Someone lingering a little too long near his house, glances that felt out of place, the faint smell of tension under the warmth of the day. He didn't let it bother him, not outwardly. He had learned long ago that giving attention to insignificant threats only distracted from real dangers. Inside his home, life was simple but carefully organized. Everything had its place, from kitchen utensils to tools in the garage. Nothing looked out of the ordinary, but a closer eye might notice subtle hints. Locks reinforced, cameras hidden, doors with extra security. These were not for paranoia. They were precautions, habits formed from years of knowing that not everyone in the world had good intentions. Visitors never commented on them, thinking them normal parts of an ordinary man's life. Despite keeping to himself, he occasionally helped neighbors. A broken lawnmower, a heavy piece of furniture, small repairs. He did them quietly, never asking for thanks. People liked him, though they did not know him well. He smiled, nodded, and moved on, careful never to reveal too much. Friendships were fine, but deep connections were complicated when one carried secrets heavier than ordinary worries. Evenings were the same. He cooked simple meals, sometimes reading or watching news to stay connected to the world. At night, he would sit on his porch for a few minutes, listening to the soft hum of crickets and distant cars. It was his time to reflect, to remember the life he had left behind and the lessons he had learned. Discipline, patience, and control were his constant companions. No matter what happened, he reminded himself to stay calm and think ahead. He also kept his body and mind in top condition. Training was not just a habit, it was a necessity. Push-ups, pull-ups, runs, and mental exercises kept him ready for anything. Though his neighbors thought of him as simply fit and active, they had no idea of the extent of his abilities. He could handle situations that most people could not even imagine. But he never flaunted it. Strength without humility, he believed, was dangerous. Sometimes he noticed the subtle hostility growing stronger. It wasn't overt, but small incidents hinted at a rising threat. Trash thrown on his lawn, harsh words muttered from passing cars, neighbors' pets left unattended near his property. It was the kind of hostility that built slowly, like a storm cloud forming on the horizon. He made mental notes, observed patterns, and prepared quietly. Patience was key. Acting too soon could bring unnecessary attention or danger. Late one night he heard noises outside, faint, almost dismissible. Doors creaked, footsteps near his property. He did not panic. Instead, he observed silently, noting positions and movements. The night was quiet except for those few irregular sounds. By morning, nothing had happened. The world went back to its calm routine, unaware of what had brushed past. He remained vigilant. Vigilance was instinct now, second nature, something embedded in him from years of operating where mistakes could cost lives. On weekends, he often visited a small park nearby. He liked the smell of fresh grass, the feel of open space. Children ran around freely, dogs barked happily, and the sun bathed the world in a warm glow. It was a reminder of why he sought peace here. Simple moments, ordinary pleasures, they were worth protecting, worth fighting for if ever needed. But for now he walked among people unnoticed, blending in, carrying skills the world had never seen and would never suspect. Neighbors occasionally tried to strike small conversations. "How's it going?" Or "Nice day today, isn't it?" He replied politely, sometimes with a smile. He listened, asked minimal questions in return, never giving away his past or capabilities. They saw a quiet man who minded his own business, not someone who had faced life and death situations and carried training that made him nearly unstoppable. By the end of part 1, the calm of the neighborhood was established. The protagonist's life and character are clear, and a subtle tension begins to build. The audience can sense that beneath the peaceful routine, a storm may be approaching, though no one, including him, acts recklessly. His strength, discipline, and quiet awareness set the stage for the events to come, creating suspense and curiosity. Life seemed ordinary, almost too ordinary, and in such calm, hidden dangers often lurked. The quiet man on the corner, with his neat lawn and polite nods, was not as ordinary as anyone could imagine. The world had given him challenges before, and he had overcome them all. What he could not yet know was that a storm was forming outside his front door, one that would test his patience, skill, and resolve in ways he had not faced for many years. But for now he remained calm, observing, waiting, blending in, and silently preparing. The neighborhood continued its quiet rhythm, unaware that the man they thought was ordinary carried a history few could comprehend, a mind trained for danger, a body capable of incredible feats, and a heart disciplined enough to stay calm even as threats grew closer. It was only a matter of time before the storm arrived. And when it did, the quiet man would remind everyone why appearances can be deceiving. The quiet rhythm of the neighborhood continued for a few days, but tension was rising like a shadow moving slowly across the streets. He noticed subtle changes, trash left near his driveway, loud laughter from cars driving past late at night, and glances from people he didn't recognize. It was nothing he couldn't handle, nothing worth alarming the neighbors over, but his instincts told him that something was brewing. Years of training had taught him that danger rarely announced itself with loud alarms. Most of the time it started quietly, almost invisible. That afternoon he returned from a short run, breathing heavily from the effort, wiping sweat from his forehead. The sun was bright, casting long shadows on the road. As he approached his home, he noticed something strange, a few small rocks and a broken garden gnome scattered across his lawn. At first glance, it seemed like the random mischief of kids in the neighborhood. But something didn't feel right. The placement of the rocks, the deliberate smashing of an object, all of it suggested intention. Someone wanted him to notice. He stepped inside, calm as ever, but he scanned the house carefully. Doors were locked, windows were closed, and nothing appeared out of place. He made a mental note to check the security cameras later, to see if anything unusual had been caught on them. He had lived in situations before where a single mistake could cost lives. He was not about to make one now. Later that evening, the quiet was shattered. He heard the sound of heavy machinery outside, loud and unmistakable. His heart did not race, but his mind sharpened instantly. He stepped onto his porch and saw a group of people, unfamiliar and angry-looking, tearing down the small fence that separated his yard from the street. Their faces twisted in sneers, and their words carried hate. He realized with a sudden clarity that this was not random vandalism. This was targeted. He remained calm, observing the group without revealing himself. They were reckless, loud, and clearly underestimating anyone who might stand against them. He recognized the type immediately. People driven by prejudice and ignorance, dangerous only because they believed they were untouchable. They did not know him, and that was their mistake. Inside, he moved quietly to his control panel, checking the security system he had installed. Cameras were operational, recording everything. He took note of each individual, memorizing faces, movements, and patterns. There was no panic in him, only observation. Every detail mattered. Every small piece of information could become a tool, a way to protect himself and ensure justice. The gang worked with shocking speed. They tore down his fence, smashed a few decorative items, and even damaged part of his porch. Some shouted insults, others laughed cruelly, making sure that anyone watching from inside the neighborhood would feel intimidated. The neighbors who watched from their windows did not intervene. They stayed quiet, some out of fear, others out of disbelief. Few realized the danger they were witnessing, or the man who was quietly watching from inside his home. Despite the chaos, he did not act immediately. He had learned that reacting too soon could escalate matters unnecessarily. Patience and planning were more powerful than blind action. He knew who they were, and more importantly, he knew how they behaved under pressure. If he played his cards carefully, he could neutralize the threat without unnecessary risk. After what seemed like hours, but was only minutes, the gang finally left, laughing and confident that they had sent a message. They were unaware that every step, every word, every action had been noted. As the noise faded, he stepped outside to inspect the damage. The fence was destroyed and parts of the yard were ruined. He took a deep breath, feeling the anger rise but controlling it with practiced discipline. This was not a time for emotion. This was a time for strategy. He called the local authorities, reporting the incident calmly and clearly. The dispatcher promised someone would come, but he knew the response would be slow. He had seen how these things were handled before. Threats like his were often minimized, and real justice rarely came without persistence. He left the call running in the background, documenting the conversation for his own records. Once the line was disconnected, he began planning. He reviewed the footage, studying the gang's behavior. He noted weaknesses, patterns, and timing. He realized that they were impulsive, overconfident, and unprepared for anyone with skill or discipline. They had made the first mistake by thinking he was just another quiet neighbor. Evening turned into night. The neighborhood settled into uneasy quiet, the kind that follows violence but before understanding. He prepared for the possibility of their return, setting simple precautions, lighting, cameras, and positions from which he could observe without being seen. He did not set traps or weapons in a threatening way. He relied on awareness and readiness. This was not about revenge yet. This was about control, about ensuring safety, about preparing for what would come next. He walked through his home, inspecting every room. Nothing was out of place inside, and he made a list of repairs needed. The damage outside could be fixed, but he knew the psychological impact of such an attack lingered. People underestimated how fear could ripple through a neighborhood, changing behavior and energy. He would not allow that fear to take hold, not here, not now. Later, he stepped outside briefly to see the stars. The night was quiet, serene almost, but he knew the calm was temporary. He remembered past experiences, places where danger seemed distant until it arrived suddenly, crushing any sense of security. He would not be caught unprepared. He had trained for this, lived for this kind of readiness, and he would not let ignorance or hate dictate the outcome. Sleep came later than usual, but it came. Even in rest, he remained alert, a quiet tension beneath the surface. Dreams were fragmented, images of past missions and training sessions blending with the recent attack. Even in sleep, his mind worked to anticipate and prepare. This was who he was now, the man who lived quietly but prepared for everything, capable of facing dangers others could not imagine. By morning, the neighborhood was buzzing quietly. People whispered about what had happened, sharing gossip and fear. Some tried to reassure each other that it was just a prank, but most felt the tension. No one knew the truth about the man whose house had been attacked. No one guessed that the quiet neighbor, who waved politely and kept to himself, had survived far worse in places most people would never dare to enter. He stepped outside to assess the damage again. The sun cast long shadows across the yard, highlighting the destruction. He noted every detail: broken fence posts, scattered plants, and marks on the ground. He photographed everything, creating records that would serve him in the coming days. He would rebuild, yes, but first, he would ensure that the people responsible understood that actions have consequences, even if they could not see them yet. Throughout the day, he moved methodically. Small repairs, documenting evidence, checking cameras. He spoke briefly to neighbors who asked questions, keeping the tone calm and controlled. No hint of anger, no mention of skills or training. He answered politely, reassured those who were afraid, and left others with a sense of normalcy. He was careful to maintain the image of the quiet man because appearances were powerful. People underestimated what they did not see. By the evening, he had formulated a plan. He would wait, observe, and respond with precision. The gang had made the mistake of underestimating him. That would not happen again. He knew the value of patience, the power of timing, and the importance of discipline. He also knew that he could act decisively if needed, in a way that would remove the threat without unnecessary chaos. As the night fell, the neighborhood seemed calm again, but he did not relax. He watched, he listened, he prepared. Every noise, every shadow, every movement was noted. He reminded himself that this was only the beginning, that patience now would ensure effectiveness later. The gang believed they had power because they had attacked, but he understood true power, the ability to control situations calmly, to plan, to act with precision. By the end of Part 2, the audience sees the protagonist's quiet strength, intelligence, and patience. The gang has shown their hostility, but he remains in control, planning and ready. Suspense builds naturally, setting the stage for the next part, where the protagonist's true abilities begin to emerge in response to the growing threat. Days passed since the attack on his home, but he didn't allow himself to be distracted by anger or fear. Instead, he focused on observing and understanding the people who had caused the damage. He knew that the gang was reckless and arrogant. They thought that destroying a small fence and leaving a mess was enough to scare him. They had no idea what they were dealing with. He had spent years learning to read people, to anticipate their actions and to find their weaknesses. Now those skills would serve him again. He started by carefully watching their routines. From his window, he could see the streets they frequented, the times they gathered, the way they moved in groups. They were predictable in their unpredictability, a dangerous combination, but one that could be managed if approached methodically. He didn't rush. Rushing was for those who let emotion control their actions. He controlled his. Inside, he spent hours reviewing the recordings from his security cameras. Each face, each movement, each word spoken was logged in his mind. He noted who seemed to lead the group, who followed blindly, and who looked nervous. These details were crucial. Strength and intelligence were useless if they weren't applied strategically. He made small sketches, drew connections, and thought about every possible outcome. At night, he trained not just physically, but mentally. His body needed to stay sharp, but his mind needed to be even sharper. He ran drills, practiced techniques silently in his living room, and simulated different scenarios. Each movement was precise, each decision calculated. His neighbors might have seen him exercising or running, but they didn't know the depth of his preparation. To them, he was still the quiet, disciplined man who minded his own business. He also thought about the gang's mindset. People like them acted on impulse, on emotion, on arrogance. They underestimated everyone, and that was their biggest mistake. He knew that if he stayed calm, patient, and calculated, he could turn their strength against them. He didn't want unnecessary conflict, but he also wouldn't allow intimidation or hatred to go unchecked. Justice, in his mind, required precision and control. During the day, he moved quietly around the neighborhood, keeping a low profile. He would observe from a distance, noting which houses they visited, which streets they used, and how they interacted with others. He didn't confront them. He didn't yell or threaten. That would have been obvious and reckless. Instead, he became a shadow, seeing more than they realized and learning more than they could imagine. One afternoon, he noticed something that made him pause. A small group of them gathered near a local park, laughing and planning something. From his vantage point, he could see their energy, careless, confident, unaware of the danger approaching. He didn't react immediately. Instead, he continued watching, learning their habits, noting their weaknesses. They were skilled at making noise, at intimidation, but they lacked discipline. That lack would be their undoing. Back at home, he prepared discreetly. Tools and everyday items were arranged strategically. simple objects positioned in ways that could provide him an advantage if needed. He didn't rely on weapons or traps. He relied on his skills, his knowledge, and his ability to move and act faster than anyone expected. Each preparation was silent, invisible, and methodical. Sometimes he felt a pull of anger, a desire to confront them immediately. But he reminded himself that anger clouds judgment. He thought of every mission he had completed, every time he had succeeded because he stayed calm while others panicked. Patience was his ally. Timing was his weapon. Acting too soon would ruin everything. He also thought about the neighborhood, about the people who were unaware of what was happening. Some were scared, some curious, some indifferent. He knew that his actions needed to protect not just himself but the community. The gang's hostility affected more than just one house. If he could neutralize the threat, he could restore peace for everyone. That sense of responsibility reminded him of why he had sought quiet in the first place. By the third day of observation, he had learned a lot. The gang had a pattern. They met at certain times, they moved in predictable ways, and they relied on their numbers more than their skill. He began to form a plan, one that would use their own overconfidence against them. He didn't need to be seen. He didn't need to fight blindly. He only needed to be precise, to strike at the exact moment they were most vulnerable. He also trained his mind to stay calm under pressure. He remembered past experiences where split-second decisions made the difference between survival and failure. Every breath, every heartbeat, every step mattered. He rehearsed scenarios in his mind, imagining what would happen if they tried to attack again, if they underestimated him further. Each possibility was explored, each reaction calculated. The nights were the hardest. Quiet and still, the darkness gave him time to reflect, to anticipate, and to prepare. He remembered why he had trained so hard, why he had endured so much. He knew that patience now would mean control later. He knew that his skills were more than just physical. They were mental, emotional, and strategic. The gang had no idea what was coming, and that would be their mistake. He also took care to remain visible in subtle ways, maintaining the image of the quiet neighbor. He mowed his lawn, waved politely, and nodded at passersby. No one suspected that the man they saw was also a strategist, a trained operative, someone who could handle situations that would terrify ordinary people. The contrast between appearance and reality worked in his favor. People underestimated him because they wanted to, and that was a powerful advantage. Then came a moment of clarity. While watching the gang from a distance, he realized that their confidence was growing. They thought they had won simply by attacking his property. That overconfidence would make them careless. They would expose themselves, make mistakes, and give him the opportunity to act without unnecessary risk. Timing was everything, and he waited patiently, letting the situation unfold naturally. In the meantime, he reinforced his home in subtle ways. Nothing overt, nothing noticeable to casual eyes, but everything positioned to give him an advantage if a confrontation occurred. Windows, doors, and entrances were arranged to control the environment, not with violence, but with strategy. He knew how to create space, how to manipulate movement, and how to ensure that any encounter would favor him without relying on luck. Throughout this period, he never lost sight of his humanity. He reminded himself that the goal was not revenge, but control, justice, and protection. The gang had acted out of ignorance and hatred, but he did not stoop to their level. Discipline, patience, and careful planning were his allies. Acting rashly would make him no better than them. Finally, after several days of observation, preparation, and reflection, he felt ready. He understood their routines, their weaknesses, and their psychology. He had anticipated every move they could make and had prepared for every possibility. He didn't rush. He didn't need to. The advantage was his because he had the discipline to wait, the patience to observe, and the skill to act decisively. As night fell once again, he stood quietly on his porch, looking at the neighborhood. Everything seemed calm, almost ordinary, but he knew better. Danger was close, but he was ready. His calm exterior masked a mind constantly working, analyzing, and planning. He knew that soon he would have to act, and when that time came, he would do so with precision and control, using every skill he had mastered over the years. By the end of Part 3, the audience sees the protagonist's intelligence, discipline, and strategic mind. He is not just strong physically. He is careful, patient, and methodical. The gang's growing overconfidence sets the stage for the confrontation. while the protagonist's preparation builds suspense and anticipation. The story emphasizes human-centered qualities, patience, intelligence, and moral control, while keeping the reader engaged and curious about what will happen next. The night was unusually quiet, almost too quiet. He stood near the window, observing the street below. Every shadow, every movement, every sound was recorded in his mind. The gang had grown bolder in the past few days, and he knew it was only a matter of time before they made another attempt. But he was ready. This time he would not wait to react. He had spent days observing, planning, and preparing. The advantage was his. As the minutes passed, he saw them emerge from the darkness. The group moved with a false sense of confidence, laughing and talking loudly, certain that no one would challenge them. They thought the quiet man in the house had been broken by their previous actions, that he had been intimidated. They were wrong. They had underestimated him, and that mistake would cost them. He watched silently, analyzing every move. Some of them carried crowbars or small tools ready to vandalize or intimidate once more. Others relied on their numbers, thinking that strength lay in group intimidation. But he noticed something important: patterns. The way they moved, the order in which they approached, even their pace. They had become predictable, and predictability was dangerous for them. Inside, he moved with quiet precision. His home was organized in a way that gave him control over the environment. He had arranged pathways, secured exits, and had observation points that allowed him to see everything without being seen. Every decision was deliberate. He did not need weapons or loud confrontation. He needed strategy, patience, and skill. His calmness was a weapon itself. When the gang reached the edge of his yard, he stepped onto the porch, calm and confident. He did not shout, he did not threaten. He simply stood there, watching. The leader of the group noticed him and sneered, thinking he could intimidate him with words. "Back again, huh? Thought we scared you off." He smiled faintly, a calm and measured expression. "I saw everything," he said quietly. "And I know what you do." The leader laughed, dismissing the words as meaningless. "Yeah, what are you going to do about it?" he taunted. His overconfidence only made the situation clearer for the observer. The man inside the house noted every reaction, every hesitation, every subtle movement. They had not learned from the last attack. They were about to learn in a way they could never have imagined. The group began to move forward, thinking the quiet man was unarmed and vulnerable. That was when he acted, not with violence for its own sake, but with precise control. He positioned himself strategically, using the shadows and obstacles to limit their movements. Their overconfidence became their weakness. He could see the panic beginning to spread as the first of them realized that they were being watched and studied, not just by eyes but by a mind prepared for every outcome. He moved with controlled speed, intercepting the first intruder before any harm could be done. The movement was so fast, so precise, that it left the others frozen in shock. They had expected hesitation, weakness, or fear. Instead, they saw skill and control. One by one, he neutralized them, not with excessive force, but with techniques that rendered them incapable of causing further harm. The neighbors, watching from a distance, were shocked. They had never imagined that the quiet man they had seen tending his lawn and waving politely could move with such skill and precision. But he didn't linger on their surprise. His focus was on the task at hand, controlling the situation and ensuring the gang could no longer threaten the neighborhood. He communicated clearly and calmly. "Leave now," he said, his voice steady. "This ends tonight. Any further actions and it will be worse for you." His words were firm but controlled, showing authority without unnecessary aggression. The message was clear. He was capable, disciplined, and unyielding. The gang leader tried to regain control, shouting orders to retreat. But fear had already taken root. They had underestimated the man before them, and the realization of their mistake was spreading rapidly. Each step they took was calculated, each movement cautious as they slowly retreated. It was not a chase. It was careful extraction from a situation they had created but could not control. Once the gang was out of immediate range, he took a moment to secure his property and check the surroundings. Every door, window, and corner was observed. He ensured that no one could return unexpectedly, that no surprise could catch him off guard. His calmness never wavered, his mind working constantly to maintain control and safety. Even after the immediate threat was gone, he did not relax. He knew that people like this often tried again, relying on luck or desperation. He began planning the next steps carefully, documenting the event, ensuring law enforcement had clear evidence, and reinforcing the security of his home. He didn't act out of anger. He acted out of responsibility, discipline, and foresight. By the following morning, the neighborhood was buzzing. People were talking quietly, hesitant but curious. The story of the confrontation was spreading, though details were sketchy. The quiet man, previously seen as ordinary, had revealed a side no one expected. But he did not seek recognition. He remained calm, polite, and focused on what mattered: safety and preparedness. He also reflected on the events internally. Confrontation was never his first choice, but when faced with aggression and hate, he had acted with precision. He had controlled the situation, protected his property, and maintained his principles. It was a reminder that strength alone was not enough. Discipline, patience, and strategy were what made a difference. Over the next few days, he continued observing the neighborhood and the gang from a distance. He noted their reactions, their changes in behavior, and their hesitations. They had learned a lesson, though perhaps not fully. His approach had been measured, controlled, and decisive, showing that even in dangerous situations, calmness and preparation could dominate chaos and aggression. He also focused on rebuilding. Repairs to the property were made efficiently, quietly, and without show. He did not want to draw attention unnecessarily. The physical repairs were simple, but the psychological message was clear. Intimidation and hate would not succeed. Peace could be restored, and the neighborhood could return to its calm rhythm, but only with vigilance and preparedness. Throughout it all, he maintained his humanity. Every action was calculated but compassionate. No one was harmed unnecessarily, and the goal was not revenge. It was control, safety, and justice. That balance between strength and restraint, action and patience, defined him. People saw him as quiet, disciplined, and polite, unaware of the depth of his experience and skill. Even at night, after the confrontation, he did not rest completely. His mind reviewed every detail, every movement, every decision. Reflection was part of preparation. He thought about the future, about how to prevent further conflict and how to maintain safety in a world that could be unpredictable and dangerous. Calm, awareness, and discipline were not just tools. They were a way of life. By the end of Part 4, the audience witnesses the protagonist's true capabilities: his skill, discipline, and calm control in the face of aggression. The gang has been neutralized temporarily. The neighborhood begins to recognize that appearances can be deceiving, and the tension is set for the final part. The story emphasizes intelligence, preparation, moral control, and human-centric qualities, keeping the audience engaged while avoiding excessive violence or sensationalism. After the confrontation, the neighborhood slowly began to regain its sense of calm. The once tense streets now felt lighter, though the memory of the attack lingered in quiet conversations between neighbors. People glanced at his home, wondering about the man who had faced aggression and walked away in control. He continued his routines as usual, mowing the lawn, jogging in the morning, and keeping to himself. But there was a subtle change in how the neighborhood regarded him. Respect mingled with curiosity, though no one fully understood the depth of his experience or the life he had lived before settling here. He focused on rebuilding his home, repairing the fence, and cleaning up the yard. Each action was methodical, deliberate, and careful, reflecting the same discipline he had shown during the confrontation. Though the physical repairs were simple, they symbolized something deeper: resilience. The damage had been done, but it would not define him or his life. He understood that restoring order in his environment was as important as controlling it during the threat. Every plank of wood, every patch of soil, every cleared corner was a reminder that he would not be shaken by ignorance or hate. While working, he reflected on the events that had unfolded. The gang had acted out of arrogance and prejudice, believing that fear and intimidation were enough to control others. They had underestimated patience, preparation, and the power of calm intelligence. He had acted decisively but with restraint, showing that true strength was not in aggression but in knowing when and how to respond. The lessons he carried from his past, the discipline honed through years of training, had guided him through a situation that might have broken a less prepared person. Neighbors occasionally approached him cautiously, offering help or asking questions about what had happened. He spoke politely but never revealed the full truth about himself. He did not need recognition or praise. His goal had never been to show off but to protect, to maintain order, and to ensure that the people around him were safe. By keeping his identity and experiences private, he preserved the peace he had worked hard to build in his own life. Despite the calm, he remained vigilant. The world could change in an instant, and people with ill intentions might try again. He did not allow paranoia to control him, but he kept his senses sharp, observing without drawing attention. Even in moments of apparent normalcy, he prepared for the unexpected. Vigilance, he knew, was not fear, it was responsibility. Protecting oneself and others required awareness and readiness, qualities he valued above all else. During the days that followed, the neighborhood began to see subtle changes in the gang. Their overconfidence had been shaken, their arrogance diminished. They moved with more caution, hesitated where they had previously acted boldly, and avoided direct confrontation. He had not needed to chase them down or punish them in ways they might remember violently. The knowledge of their own mistake, the awareness that they had underestimated someone, became a lesson in itself. Discipline and intelligence had won quietly, but decisively. He also took time to connect in small ways with neighbors who had been affected by the gang's actions. Some were frightened, others curious, and a few were still unsure about the safety of the area. He reassured them without grand gestures, offering practical advice and demonstrating calm confidence. His presence alone became a subtle source of comfort. People realized that the quiet man they had once overlooked was someone who could handle situations that frightened others. They did not know the full story, but they sensed the reliability and competence that came from experience and training. Evenings were spent in reflection. He thought about the life he had led before moving here, the lessons learned and the challenges overcome. He remembered missions where patience, precision, and calm had made the difference between success and failure. Those experiences had shaped him into someone capable of responding to threats without losing control. Here, in a peaceful neighborhood, those skills were no less valuable. They simply took a different form. Instead of life-or-death combat, the challenge was protecting a home, a community, and a sense of peace. At night, he would sit quietly on his porch, watching the stars and listening to the soft hum of the neighborhood. The tranquility was a reminder of why he had chosen this life. Simple moments, the rustle of leaves, distant laughter, and the gentle wind were worth protecting. He thought about how easily fear and hatred could disrupt ordinary lives, and he took satisfaction in knowing that his actions had prevented further harm. This sense of responsibility was not a burden, but a principle he lived by. He also reflected on the importance of discipline and self-control. In life, many people reacted impulsively to threats, letting anger dictate their choices. He had seen the consequences of such reactions firsthand. By maintaining calm, observing carefully, and planning strategically, he had neutralized a threat without creating chaos. That balance between action and restraint was the essence of true strength. He had used his abilities not for show or revenge, but to restore order and protect those around him. As the neighborhood settled further, he noticed small gestures of appreciation from people he had rarely spoken to before. A nod, a smile, a quiet thank you when passing by. These small signs of acknowledgement were meaningful. They did not fully understand his past, but they recognized his presence, his competence, and the subtle reassurance he brought. It was a reminder that actions often speak louder than words, and that integrity and skill applied with restraint earned respect without the need for recognition. Life returned to its quiet rhythm, yet he remained prepared. He continued his runs, his training, and his observation. His home, once attacked, was now fully restored. The garden was neat, the fence rebuilt, and every detail carefully arranged. He had turned the aftermath of aggression into a reaffirmation of discipline and control. His environment reflected not only resilience but also the strength that comes from preparation, foresight, and self-discipline. He also considered the future. While the immediate threat had passed, life was unpredictable. People with ill intentions might